The security guards planted themselves firmly in the old man's path, their hands instinctively inching toward their holstered weapons. "Sir, this is a restricted area. You need proper credentials to be here," the lead guard said, voice low but unyielding. Around them, the crowd of military families and dignitaries gathered for the Navy SEAL graduation ceremony glanced nervously, sensing tension. The elderly man stood silently, clutching a small, faded photograph in his calloused hands. His plain civilian clothes made him blend in like a ghost, an outsider among those celebrating honor and achievement. From across the courtyard, 3 young Navy SEALs in their crisp dress uniforms noticed the standoff. Their faces turned pale as recognition dawned. Without hesitation, they broke from formation, their purposeful march cutting through the crowd like a thunderclap. Conversations hushed, and all eyes turned, the air charged with a sudden reverence. These weren't just any soldiers. They were the elite, ready to defend not just their country, but the man who had shaped their very existence. Approaching the guards, the SEALs spoke firmly but respectfully, their words carrying a weight that brooked no argument. The elderly man was not just another civilian. He was the legendary commander whose leadership had forged the SEAL teams of today. The photograph in his hand was a symbol of a legacy that transcended rank and time. In that moment, the ceremony paused, not to celebrate new beginnings, but to honor the man who had laid the foundation for all that was to come. What followed was a profound reminder that sometimes the greatest warriors wear no uniform, and that true respect is earned in a lifetime of sacrifice, not just the medals worn on a single day. Welcome to Echoes of Honor, where we discover that the most important people are often the ones others try to keep out. Before we continue this incredible story about respect, legacy, and the bonds that unite generations of warriors, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe these stories about military brotherhood and honoring those who paved the way deserve to be shared, please hit that subscribe button to join our growing community. Your support helps us honor the unsung heroes who shaped today's heroes. The Naval Special Warfare Command graduation ceremony at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was scheduled to begin at 1,000 hours on a perfect Southern California morning in October. The event would mark the culmination of the most demanding military training in the world, as 23 young men officially became Navy SEALs after completing the grueling basic underwater demolition/SEAL training that had tested every aspect of their physical, mental, and emotional endurance. Families had traveled from across the country to witness this momentous occasion, filling the ceremony grounds with parents, siblings, spouses, and children who had supported their loved ones through the months of training that had transformed ordinary young men into members of America's most elite Special Operations Force. The atmosphere buzzed with pride, anticipation, and the kind of reverence that accompanies truly significant military milestones. Security for the event was necessarily tight, reflecting both the classified nature of SEAL operations and the high-profile status of many attendees, including senior military officials, government representatives, and family members of graduates whose own military service had earned them recognition and respect. Multiple checkpoints, credential verification, and restricted access areas ensured that only authorized personnel could enter the ceremony grounds. The security protocols were managed by a team of military police and civilian contractors who had been briefed on the importance of maintaining strict access control while accommodating the legitimate needs of families and officials attending the ceremony. Their instructions emphasized vigilance, professionalism, and the understanding that any security breach could compromise both the safety of attendees and the integrity of special operations procedures. Standing at the main security checkpoint was Chief Petty Officer Frank Delacroix, though none of the guards processing credentials recognized his name or understood the significance of his presence at the ceremony. At 81, Frank moved slowly and deliberately, his civilian clothes and obvious age marking him as someone who clearly didn't belong among the younger families and active military personnel gathering for the graduation. Frank carried with him only a small black and white photograph, creased and faded from decades of careful handling, showing a group of young men in military uniforms from an era when SEAL training was conducted under different names and less sophisticated conditions. The men in the photograph were the original Navy frogmen, the underwater demolition teams that had evolved into the modern SEAL program, and Frank was one of the few surviving members of that pioneering generation. His presence at the ceremony wasn't accidental or unauthorized. Frank had received a personal invitation from the commanding officer of the SEAL training program, who understood that the graduation of new SEALs represented a continuation of traditions and values that had been established by men like Frank decades earlier. But the invitation had been verbal rather than written, and Frank had no formal credentials or documentation that would satisfy standard security procedures. When Frank approached the security checkpoint, the guards immediately identified him as someone who didn't fit the standard profile of authorized attendees. His age, civilian clothing, and lack of obvious family connections to any of the graduates made him an anomaly that triggered their security awareness protocols. The lead guard, Sergeant Martinez, approached Frank with professional courtesy but obvious suspicion. "Good morning, sir. I'll need to see your invitation and identification to enter the ceremony area," Martinez said, his tone suggesting that Frank's presence was already questionable and that any irregularities in his documentation would result in immediate denial of access. Frank produced his driver's license and explained that his invitation had been verbal, coming directly from the commanding officer who had wanted him to attend as a representative of the original underwater demolition teams that had preceded the modern SEAL program. His explanation, while truthful, sounded implausible to guards who were trained to be suspicious of anyone seeking access without proper documentation. "Sir, I don't have any record of your invitation in our system," Martinez replied, his skepticism evident as he reviewed the guest list on his tablet. "Without proper credentials, I can't allow you access to the ceremony. This is a restricted military event with strict security requirements." Other security personnel had noticed the developing situation and moved closer to provide backup if the elderly man became argumentative or difficult to manage. Their body language suggested they viewed Frank as a potential security risk rather than a distinguished veteran whose presence had been specifically requested by senior command. Frank's response was characteristic of the dignity and respect for authority that had marked his entire military career. "I understand you're doing your job, Sergeant. The commanding officer did invite me personally, but I don't have written documentation. Is there someone I could speak with to verify my invitation?" The guard's suspicion deepened as Frank's explanation continued to lack the kind of concrete evidence they were trained to require. From their perspective, elderly civilians who claimed personal relationships with commanding officers and verbal invitations to classified ceremonies were exactly the type of security risks they were supposed to identify and exclude. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the checkpoint," Martinez announced, his voice carrying increased authority as he prepared to remove what he had determined was an unauthorized person attempting to gain access to a restricted military event. "If you don't have proper credentials, you cannot enter this area." The confrontation was beginning to attract attention from families and military personnel moving through the security checkpoint, many of whom paused to observe what appeared to be a standard security procedure involving someone who had attempted to gain unauthorized access to the graduation ceremony. But among the spectators were three young men whose attention had been captured not by the security dispute, but by the face of the elderly man being turned away. Petty Officers Second-Class Marcus Johnson, David Chun, and Michael Rodriguez had just completed their final preparations for the graduation ceremony when they noticed the confrontation at the security checkpoint. These three SEALs had spent countless hours during their training studying the history of naval special warfare, learning about the evolution of underwater demolition teams into modern SEAL units, and memorizing the names and achievements of the pioneers who had established the traditions they were about to join. They had seen Frank's photograph in historical displays, training materials, and unit heritage presentations that emphasized the connection between past and present generations of special operations personnel. Recognition dawned simultaneously on all three faces as they realized that the man being denied access to their graduation ceremony was Chief Petty Officer Frank Delacroix, one of the most legendary figures in the history of underwater demolition operations, a man whose innovations and courage had shaped the very foundation of modern SEAL training and operations. Without hesitation or consultation, the three SEALs broke away from their formation and marched toward the security checkpoint with the kind of determined purpose that immediately commanded attention from everyone in the vicinity. Their movement was precise, coordinated, and carried the unmistakable authority of men who had been trained to take decisive action when circumstances demanded immediate response. Petty Officer Johnson, the senior member of the trio, addressed the security guards with the respect due to fellow military personnel while making it clear that a serious error was being made. "Sergeant Martinez, sir, I need to inform you that you're denying access to Chief Petty Officer Frank Delacroix, one of the founding fathers of naval special warfare." The transformation in the security guards' demeanor was immediate as they began to understand that their standard security procedures had intercepted someone whose presence at the ceremony was not only authorized but essential to the event's significance. Martinez looked from the young SEALs to Frank with growing uncertainty about how to proceed. Petty Officer Chin stepped forward to provide additional context that would help the guards understand the magnitude of their mistake. Chief Delacroix was part of the original Underwater Demolition Team 11 during World War II in Korea. His combat innovations and training methods are still taught in our program today. He's not just invited to this ceremony. He should be honored at it. The crowd that had gathered to observe the security dispute now found themselves witnessing something far more significant than a routine access denial. Families, military officials, and other attendees began to realize that they were in the presence of living history, someone whose service had directly contributed to the elite training program their own loved ones had just completed. Petty Officer Rodriguez provided the final piece of information that would completely transform the situation. "Sir, Chief Delacroix holds the Navy Cross for actions during the Incheon landings in Korea, where he led underwater demolition operations that enabled the successful amphibious assault. Every technique we use for beach reconnaissance and obstacle clearance was developed by men like him." The revelation that Frank was not only a founding member of naval special warfare, but also a decorated combat veteran whose innovations had shaped modern SEAL operations created a moment of profound recognition among everyone present. The security guards who had been prepared to remove him now understood they had been confronting one of the most distinguished veterans in the history of their service. Sergeant Martinez immediately stepped aside and addressed Frank with the respect due to a senior military figure whose service had earned recognition at the highest levels. "Chief Delacroix, sir, I apologize for the confusion. We had no information about your invitation in our system. Please allow us to escort you to the VIP seating area." But the three young SEALs had a different idea about how Frank should be honored at the ceremony. Johnson turned to his two teammates with an expression that suggested they were all thinking the same thing. "Chief, we'd be honored if you would sit with our families. You're the reason we're here today, and we want you to be part of our graduation as our guest of honor." The spontaneous invitation from the new SEALs to the man who had helped establish their profession created a moment that transcended standard military protocol and touched the deepest traditions of brotherhood and respect that defined special operations culture. Frank's response reflected both his gratitude and his understanding of what the gesture meant to the young warriors who would carry forward the legacy he had helped create. "Gentlemen, it would be my honor to share this day with you and your families," Frank replied, his voice carrying the emotion of someone who had witnessed the evolution of his life's work into something greater than he had ever imagined possible. The transformation at the security checkpoint from confrontation to recognition had attracted the attention of the ceremony's commanding officer, Captain Sarah Mitchell, who approached to understand what had caused the commotion among her graduating SEALs. When she learned that Chief Delacroix had been delayed by security procedures, her response was immediate and decisive. "Chief Delacroix, I'm Captain Mitchell, and I personally invited you to this ceremony," she announced, her voice carrying both authority and respect. "These young men are absolutely right. You belong in the place of honor today, not just as a guest, but as one of the founders of everything we represent." Captain Mitchell's recognition of Frank's significance elevated the moment from a simple security correction to a formal acknowledgement of his role in naval special warfare history. Her decision to personally escort him to the ceremony created an impromptu processional that demonstrated proper respect for someone whose contributions had shaped generations of special operations personnel. As Frank made his way to the ceremony seating area, accompanied by the three SEALs and their commanding officer, every person they passed stood to acknowledge his presence. The spontaneous show of respect rippled through the gathering as word spread about who he was and why his presence at the graduation carried such profound significance. During the ceremony, Frank was introduced to the audience as a representative of the underwater demolition teams that had evolved into the modern SEAL program. His presence connected the historical foundations of naval special warfare to its contemporary mission, demonstrating the continuity of values and traditions that had been passed down through generations of warriors. The 3 SEALs who had recognized Frank and intervened on his behalf were called forward during the ceremony to receive their SEAL pins. But before the traditional presentation could occur, they made an unprecedented request. They asked that Chief Delacroix be given the honor of presenting their pins, symbolically connecting their entry into the SEAL community with the historical legacy he represented. The pin presentation became one of the most meaningful moments in the ceremony's history, as Frank's weathered hands placed the SEAL Trident pins on the uniforms of 3 young warriors who would carry forward the traditions he had helped establish decades earlier. The connection between past and present generations of special operations personnel was made visible and tangible in a way that would be remembered by everyone present. During the reception following the ceremony, Frank shared stories from the early days of underwater demolition operations, describing training methods and combat operations that had been conducted with equipment and techniques far more primitive than what modern SEALs had available. His accounts revealed both the evolution of special operations capabilities and the consistency of character and courage that had always defined elite military units. The photograph that Frank had carried to the ceremony was revealed to contain images of several men who had become legendary figures in special operations history, including Medal of Honor recipients and innovators whose contributions had shaped modern military doctrine. Frank's preservation of their memory and his presence at contemporary graduations helped ensure that their sacrifices and achievements would not be forgotten. The security guards who had initially denied Frank access later approached him to apologize personally and to express their gratitude for his service. Sergeant Martinez spoke for his entire team when he said that meeting Frank had given them a deeper understanding of the history and traditions they were protecting through their security duties. The 3 SEALs who had recognized Frank maintained contact with him long after their graduation, visiting him regularly and ensuring that his stories and experiences were recorded for future generations of special operations personnel. Their intervention at the security checkpoint had begun relationships that would honor and preserve naval special warfare history. Captain Mitchell arranged for Frank to be given permanent VIP access to all future SEAL graduation ceremonies, ensuring that his presence would continue to connect new generations of operators with the historical foundations of their profession. His attendance became a tradition that reinforced the importance of understanding and honoring the legacy that each new SEAL inherited. The incident at the security checkpoint became a teaching moment for military personnel about the importance of recognizing and respecting veterans whose service might not be immediately obvious, but whose contributions had been fundamental to current military capabilities. Frank's experience demonstrated that heroism often wears civilian clothes, and that the most important people are sometimes those who seem least likely to belong. The verbal invitation that had seemed inadequate to security procedures was revealed to have been entirely appropriate and necessary, representing the kind of personal recognition that senior military leaders owe to the veterans whose service had made their own positions possible. Frank's presence at the ceremony honored both his individual achievements and the collective contribution of all who had served before. The photograph that Frank carried became part of the permanent display at the Naval Special Warfare Command, where it served as a reminder to future generations of SEALs about the men who had established the foundations of their profession. His attendance at graduations ensured that new operators understood they were joining a brotherhood that extended far beyond their immediate training class. In the years that followed, Frank became a regular speaker at SEAL training events, sharing his experiences and emphasizing the importance of maintaining the values and traditions that had defined special operations forces throughout their history. His stories connected contemporary training to historical precedent, demonstrating that current techniques and procedures had been developed through decades of combat experience and innovation. The 3 SEALs who had intervened on Frank's behalf often reflected on how their recognition of his significance had taught them about the importance of knowing and honoring military history. Their action at the security checkpoint had demonstrated that true leadership sometimes requires challenging authority to ensure that the right thing is done. The security checkpoint that had briefly become a barrier to Frank's attendance was transformed into a reminder that proper respect for veterans requires more than following procedures. It requires understanding the significance of service and the obligation to honor those whose sacrifices had made current freedoms possible. Sometimes the most important moments occur when young warriors recognize the giants upon whose shoulders they stand and take action to ensure that those giants receive the honor they deserve. The 3 Navy SEALs who cleared the way for Frank Delacroix had demonstrated that true strength includes the courage to challenge systems that fail to recognize greatness, even when that greatness wears civilian clothes and carries only faded photographs as credentials. This story was brought to you by Echoes of Honor. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose contributions to your profession or community were foundational but often overlooked. Tell us in the comments about the pioneers in your life who paved the way for your success and how you've honored their legacy. And if you think stories like these about military brotherhood and honoring those who came before deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.